Welcome to the Vantage HR Influencers podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Vantage Circle, the simple and AI-powered rewards and recognition platform for employee engagement.
In today's globalized and interconnected world, workplaces are increasingly becoming melting pots of diverse cultures, backgrounds, and perspectives. Yet, within this magnificent diversity lies a profound challenge: the need to confront and transcend cross-cultural issues in the workplace. It's no longer sufficient to merely acknowledge the differences. We must wholeheartedly embrace the immense value that diversity brings. Our journey today is to understand why this is an absolute imperative for businesses and institutions yearning to thrive in an ever-changing global landscape. So without further ado, let's dive into the fascinating realm of cross-cultural dynamics in the workplace and explore how it can shape a brighter, more innovative future for us all. Hello listeners, welcome to another episode of Vantage Influencers podcast, where we explore a wide range of HR topics that are sure to grab your attention and inspire you. I'm your host, Sanjeevani Saikia, and today we will be having a conversation on overcoming cross-cultural issues in the workplace. And for the same, I have with me Luc Jones, Head of Senior Level Permanent Staffing, Randstad India. Hi, Luc.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to wholeheartedly thank you for giving your invaluable time and joining us in today's episode. Before we dive deeper into today's topic, overcoming cross-cultural issues in the workplace, could you kindly walk us through your corporate journey so far?
Sure, absolutely. No, pleasure. Well, my name is Luc Jones. I'm British, although my mother is from the French-speaking part of Canada, Quebec, and I have 25 years of experience in international recruitment. I've worked in many countries, mostly in Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and now I'm based in Bangalore in India, recruiting for multinational companies and local firms. And obviously, cross-cultural issues are at the very heart of what we do.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. Luc, today we will be discussing cross-cultural differences in the workplace. So to get us started, how would you define cross-cultural issues, be it in the workplace or anywhere for that matter? How would you like to go about it, so defining it?
Sure. Well, there are approximately 8 billion people on this planet, and we're all different in some way,
Yes.
Although I think there are more things that unite us than divide us. But obviously, there are specifics to each national group or to cultural groups within certain countries. There are also lots of stereotypes, and some of these are actually true. So to give you a simple example, I wrote a book called Why Russians Don't Smile because I was based in Moscow for many, many years. And this is a stereotype that foreigners have, but
yes.
There is some truth in it. Okay. And of course, people are now asking me, when are you going to write a book called Why Indians Always Smile? Because the view of people from outside of Asia is that Indians, and actually Asians in general, do smile a lot, which is obviously lovely, nice and welcoming. Maybe because your climate is warmer and it makes people warmer at heart. But again, if I look at, for example, why do Russians not smile immediately? Well, they do, just not immediately, because they don't see it as a reason to, if there isn't actually a reason to begin with. So we might smile at people because we want to make them feel comfortable, whereas, let's say in Russia, where it's a lot colder, they don't see the need for that. So again, there are generalizations, there are stereotypes, but
Yes.
Obviously the whole issue of cross-cultural is about overcoming these and getting people to work better together.
Really interesting. As you know, Luc, as organizations strive to create inclusive environments, they often encounter unique challenges stemming from cultural differences among employees. I believe these challenges can again manifest in various ways. So could you help us identify those challenges that arise due to cultural differences?
I mean, one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of travel in general is because I think it opens people's eyes up and it smashes the stereotypes that people have. Because if you're from another part of the world, especially from, say, Europe or North America, and you've never been to India before, your perception will be usually from what you've seen in a Bollywood movie. So people think there's dancers going down the street and elephants on either side, or people sitting on mountain tops, doing yoga and chanting mantras, or they've watched Slumdog Millionaire, and that's going to be their impression of India. Okay, and obviously they get here and it's rather different. But you could say the same thing about almost any country. That, if you ask people what's the first thing that comes into your head when you think of Australia, it's probably kangaroos and boomerangs. And again, obviously it's rather different when you arrive. So the important thing is for people to realize that, look, we're all people, okay? Most people in the world have similar ambitions and goals. We want to get on in life. And the important thing is to, let's say, be sensitive of how other people live and behave. And I'll come on to some of the specifics of certain countries, and things maybe that I found different about being in India. Just as examples, because, as I said, each country is different, but not as different as people like to think. I mean, I regularly hear this. I mean, in the world, officially, there are 195 countries. I've been to 156 of them. Okay, so 39 to go. Yeah. Now, many of those have been as a tourist, okay, but many of those also have been for work. Probably fewer, more just to visit. Yeah. And again, one of the interesting things I've found is that a lot of people love to think that everywhere else in the world is dangerous, except where they come from themselves. And I find this rather bizarre. I would blame the media for this. Okay, that, when I say that I've been to places like Syria or Sudan or Tajikistan, Venezuela, North Korea, people's reaction is, ooh, isn't it dangerous there? And I asked, well, why do you think so? And of course it's not. Where do you get that idea from? Well, I saw some documentary on CNN or BBC. And I said, look, no journalist ever became famous by writing about the trains running on time. Okay? Yes. News requires sensation. And obviously, most of the time, things just carry on as normal. People want to live their lives. And again, that's why I encourage travel. But coming back to the actual workplace, this is why I think having a diverse office is a great help, because first of all, it makes things a lot more interesting. I mean, I'm the only non-Indian out of about 3,000 staff here. Okay, so I stick out a little bit, all right? But I'm based in Bangalore, which is obviously a melting pot for a lot of people from all over the country. True. Lots of languages, lots of different cultures. And again, India is an extremely diverse country. So there's a good example.
Yeah, and that was a really interesting perspective from your side. Luc, do you believe that all of these arise from underlying unconscious biases? I think that unconscious biases may hinder cross-cultural collaboration. So how can we proactively identify it, and what shall we do about it in the first place?
I think unconscious bias exists everywhere, and we will probably never get rid of it totally, because it's human nature that if you think about it, you are friends with people who have similar interests to you or are of a similar background. That's normal, okay? And I see this, that I, for example, mix with some other foreigners here. And, there are things that I have more in common with, for example, other Europeans than I might do with local Indians, okay? And again, people will usually hire other people who are similar to themselves. Now, what do you do about that? Well, again, I look at what somebody can do rather than just do I like them. Obviously, I have to take into account, would this person fit into the team? How are they going to get on with everybody else? Okay. And, again, that's human nature, as I said. But I also say to people, look, the important thing is that we've all got one goal, at work, and that's to be successful, to do what it is we need to do. But I think that a lot of it is also about a combination of education and discussion.
Yes.
Now, one of the things people find when they come to India and Asia in general, that it's very rare that you will hear the word no. Okay.
Yeah.
One of the first things I was taught when I came to India was, if somebody says to you, yes, but, that probably means no. Or I'll look into it, or maybe is generally a no.
Yes.
Okay. Now, Brits are guilty of this a little bit. We would say not really when we actually mean no. All right. Have you ever done this? Well, not recently.
Not really.
That probably means I've never done it. Whereas in East European Russian culture, you'll immediately get a niet, like no. And you can be thrown aback by this. It's very blunt. But at least you know where you stand. That for us, it's a bit vague when somebody says, I will do my best. And that's basically a polite way of saying no. You're thinking, this lulls us into a false sense of security. We think, he's going to do his best. So a lot of it is, as I said, education, it's practice, it's meeting other people. And I ask people questions about, what do you do in your society? So, for example, for some people, timekeeping is extremely important. Okay.
Yes.
Like Germans, for example, love to plan ahead. Okay. Most Germans could tell you what they're doing in a year's time. It'll be in their diary. Okay. Whereas other cultures can't tell you what they're doing tomorrow. All right. Pluses and minuses. The important thing to remember is none of this is right or wrong. Okay. Or good or bad. It's just different. And you have to take this into account. And there are pluses and minuses to this. So yes, I do like planning ahead to some extent, but I don't want to live my entire life in the future.
Luc, I think you would agree, organizations that prioritize cultural sensitivity create an inclusive and harmonious environment where employees from diverse backgrounds thrive. So somewhere it's important to explore effective strategies that organizations can implement. So according to you, what strategies can organizations implement to foster a workplace which is culturally sensitive?
What I've seen many companies do is they move some people around. Okay, so I sometimes think that allowing people placements or visits to other offices in other parts of the country or the world are very useful. Yes. And when people discuss things and ask questions like, look, how would you do this in your society? Okay, so one of the things I've found, again, simple example, is that, in India, for example, people obviously make friends at work, okay, which is great, but, personal life is kept very separate.
Yes.
All right. Whereas other places I've worked at in Eastern Europe, essentially, your work and your personal life are totally entwined and mixed in, all right, which some societies can find quite strange. Okay. In the UK, where I'm from, it's probably somewhere in the middle, that there are people who keep themselves to themselves. They go to work, they leave, and they don't really interact with their colleagues. Okay. Yeah. So again, I think the important thing is that people are aware of how certain things are done in certain places. And that can be overcome, as I said, by inviting people from other offices. I like it when people have the opportunity to live and work abroad. I'm a huge fan, as I said, of travel, but also when people are a bit younger, to go off, do a bit of traveling, maybe get some work experience abroad. That I've talked to people who, for example, are living and working here in India with me. And I say, okay, have you been outside of the country? Oh, yeah, I did a 2-year placement in the US. I studied or I worked. And I always ask, okay, what did you take away from that? What were your expectations before you went? Usually based on some Hollywood movie. But what was it actually like being there on a day-to-day basis? And one of the things I encourage if somebody's moved to a new country is I say, look, get involved with people, ask them how, what they do. One of the things I've found is that, for example, Indians are extremely welcoming and friendly. Okay, I think that a lot of the world could learn a lot from you. Okay, it's not a compliment, that's just an observation. All right. On the other hand, though, one of the things that I do find the society here extremely conservative.
It's conservative, yes.
Okay, compared to what I'm used to. Okay. Especially having worked in Russia and ex-Soviet countries. So again, Indians, for example, obviously there's a huge diaspora of Indians, nearly 20 million abroad. But again, most of these people, the majority of Indians, if they go abroad, tend to go to English-speaking countries or the Middle East.
Yes.
Okay, because it's a bit more familiar.
Familiar to them, yes.
Yeah, which again makes sense. Now, a lot of the countries I've worked in are places like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. And these countries are actually closer to Delhi than we are here in Bangalore. But they might as well be on the moon. People know next to nothing about them.
Nothing about them, yes.
Yeah. And because they have...
very less, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. If I asked most people, what's the capital of Kazakhstan? I bet you 99% of people, again, even if they're highly educated, would not know that. Because they don't need to know, even though it's actually quite close. But the reason I mention this is because the country has the word stan at the end. So people tend to associate it with Afghanistan or Pakistan, which again, totally not like that. Again, most people's reaction are like, what were you doing in Kazakhstan? And when I say, it's an oil-based economy and we were we were placing people. And again, it was totally different from how people expected it to be. So again, I find that the sharing of information is extremely useful. Nowadays, there's so much on the internet. The important thing is to move away from sensationalist, let's say, clips that you see. And again, even it's not just the media, even vloggers can be like this. One of the reasons why I created a channel of my own, it's called Luc Jones The Other Way, is to actually do it the other way around and show non-sensationalist stuff. Okay, because many people, for example, will go to North Korea and film say, look, aren't I brave? I'm in North Korea. And I think, I've been to North Korea and it was absolutely fine. Yes, there are rules, just like everywhere else. But again, you're not going to become famous by doing something normal.
Yes. So, see, again, you have mentioned social media here, so how it can have an impact. So, can you elaborate or throw some light on this? Because I think that is something that our listeners would love to know. So how can social media have an impact in this particular subject matter?
Well, one of the things I do is I travel around India quite a lot. I've been to 15 states already in my first year. Okay. And as a result, I post a lot of things on Facebook, on Instagram, LinkedIn. I do more for work. But again, a few photos if we're opening a new office in Calcutta or in Delhi, Mumbai. But I do post a lot of pictures so that my friends back home who don't come here probably won't, or maybe they'll see it and think about it and say, okay, let's go and visit Luc. I'm not promising you a flood of tourists amongst my friends, but you never know. A few people have come and a few people are planning to. But the important thing, again, is to show this is what it's like. And I find it interesting that when I'm visiting tourist sites, like last weekend, I went to Bhubaneswar, the city of temples, and we drove down to Konark on the Bay of Bengal to see the Sun Temple. And I was with two other Europeans and we were the only foreigners there. And, lots of people were coming up to us saying, can we have a selfie with you, please? And that happens quite often. Yes. All right. I've seen that happen. I've been traveling around. Obviously not if you go to Goa.
Yes. It's never used to it. Yes.
There. Yeah. But, and in Bangalore, I walk up and down the road and nobody pays me any attention because there's quite a lot of foreign people either living or working here. But again, you go to tourist sites and you will quite probably, again, not the Taj Mahal, but I went to Srinagar Fort just outside Pune 2 weeks ago when I had a business trip there. I like to go up on the weekend and have a look around. And, people come up and they are very friendly and people are genuinely curious as to what you're doing here. Yeah. We sometimes find this a little bit intrusive because in Europe, it's unusual to go up to strangers and just ask them questions. But again, I don't see this as anything bad. I think we assume that people are trying to sell you something. But actually, in most cases, they're not. They're just sort of interested in, are you working here? Are you first time here? Do you like it here? And, in that respect, it's lovely. I think, we could learn a little bit from that. But again, one of the things I've found is that in Europe, you get very used to doing everything yourself. Whereas I found in India that even in the office, we will have, maybe 8 office boys who pretty much do everything. And they're now used to the fact that I make my own coffee. But if I look at the other managers, they have somebody do it for them. Yeah. So again, you pick these things up. And I think also most people are, let's say, sensitive to the fact that somebody coming from elsewhere may not be aware of every single part of your culture. And, you can obviously mention this, and there are companies that offer cross-cultural communication courses about how things are done, all right? Which, we typically recommend that if you're going to stay somewhere, let's say if you're going to move, then, or you join a new organization with, let's say, headquarters somewhere else outside of India, is, ask people. So, how do you like to work? What's it like, in your home country? What are the differences? Because to give you an example here, one German guy I spoke to who relocated recently said that, Indians are extremely proactive, which I have to say I like that, because in ex-socialist countries, people are the opposite. They just sit around waiting for something to happen. Indians don't, they go and do it. But sometimes this can be a bit over the top, that you'll have a situation where, an Indian guy will ring someone in Germany, ask a question. If they don't get an answer straight away, they just start phoning other people. Now, in Germany, it doesn't work like that. You phone different people for a different purpose. And then Germans will start overanalyzing, saying, well, why is this guy ringing 5 different people who've all got different designations? And and they'll overanalyze it and discuss it. So once again, it's not wrong. It's just sort of ways of getting things done. Okay, so I think a lot of it is, it takes time. But most of the time, I think honestly, it depends on also what you're looking to achieve. Are you planning to move somewhere else? Are you planning just to visit somewhere, or are you staying here but working in a different environment? And, I ask people. It's perfectly okay. I think it's perfectly okay to ask, for example, if I look at Indian names, all right, take your cricketer, MS Dhoni. Now, to a foreigner, I would think to myself, well, where's the first name and where's the last name? Okay, is he Mr. Dhoni, or is it, is MS the surname initialed? Because that is not clear to us. Okay. But on the other hand, though, I always say to people, look, it's perfectly okay to ask, to say, look, how do you like to be addressed? Because in some cultures, for example, China, Vietnam, Korea, they put the surname before the first name. All right. But for us, they sometimes change it round. All right. Some people prefer a nickname. I've noticed that people with slightly longer names like Siddharth might just shorten it to Sid, which is fine. Okay. So, it's absolutely okay to ask people, look, how do you like to be addressed? How do you like to do this? Is there a particular way that we should be doing this? Again, ask colleagues. Don't ask it 100 times, but or observe at the same time. Most people will excuse you if you do something that you shouldn't, because it's, let's say, different in your culture. But, try not to, repeat that mistake too often. And again, if you see somebody doing something that in their culture is okay, but in ours isn't, I would say, look, just take them to one side and say, look, we don't do that here. But again, don't tell people what they shouldn't do. Say, look, in our culture or in our office, this is how we do things slightly differently. And I think that's absolutely fine if it's done tactfully.
Yeah, interesting. I'm really enjoying this conversation myself. So, Luc, as we discuss the importance of cross-cultural understanding in the workplace, it's inspiring to learn from real-life examples. So can you share any examples of cross-cultural initiatives that have been implemented successfully? I think our listeners would be very interested to know it.
Sure, no, absolutely. What I've seen is, if we take India as an example, is when we have people who, for example, are posted to other markets for some time. Some might go on business trips for a week. Some may go on a placement for a year or two and then come back. And then they can share a lot of the knowledge they have from there, or even if there are regional meetups with people from other offices. So again, we shouldn't ever lump Asia into one group in the same way that we shouldn't lump Europe into one group. Okay, because, for example, Randstad, where I work, we, in addition to 20-something offices in India, we have sizable offices in China, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, and then down in Australia and New Zealand. Now, these countries are all quite different from each other. Okay, so you can't generalize. So what happens in Japan is, totally different from what happens in India. Okay, Japan is a very conservative work society. It's extremely hierarchical. It's unusual for women to be promoted into senior positions. But again, these things are changing. So there are stereotypes that everybody only wants to work for a Japanese company and they only want to work in one place their entire lives. All right. And if you're a woman, you work as a receptionist for two years, then you get married, get pregnant, and you never come to the office again. All right. There's still some truth in that, but it's changing. Okay. So people are not just joining one company and working forever. Many still do. Okay. Again, if I look at situations in India, for example, a lot of the time there was a tendency for people to think that they had to go abroad if they wanted to better themselves.
I think it's still there.
It is still. I think I asked somebody and I said, why is this? And they said two things. It's the grass is always greener on the other side, or it's FOMO, fear of missing out. Now, I say to people, look, if you have the chance to go abroad, go for it. But do not automatically assume the grass is going to be greener. Okay, there are pluses and minuses to every country. Now, I would definitely go for the experience, but many Indians have told me that if they're in a reasonably senior position in India, they have everything done for them. Okay, I find it surprising that people earning 10, 15 lakhs a month have their own cook. Okay, now, I have never had my own cook ever, and probably never will, because I like cooking and I've always learned to do it myself. I mean, you go to North America and, even a senior executive earning $100,000 or $200,000 a year will mow his own lawns. Okay. It's just something we do. And one senior guy said, look, I've been offered jobs in Europe, but here I have a driver, a cleaner, my own chef, a nanny, whereas you're unlikely to get that if in certain other countries. You might in Dubai. Okay. So again, it's not good or bad. It's just, sometimes you need to go there to see that. And I would absolutely encourage people to travel. If you have the chance to spend a bit of time studying, working, seeing other cultures, it opens people's eyes. And I find generally that people are a lot richer once they come back. But please do not assume that everything will be on a plate for you. I've met quite a lot of Indians who've spent 5, 10, 15 years abroad. And of course, I'm curious. My job is to ask people questions about their career. And I ask people, why did you come back? And many people who went to Canada say, look, I just couldn't handle the winter, okay, because it's pretty cold. It's brutal there, all right? And if you come from a country where it's warm all year round to suddenly, wrapping up for 4 or 5 months a year just to go to the shop. And again, I've talked to people who said, look, India's pretty chaotic, okay, organized chaos, but it's very family oriented. Whereas our families in Western society are much less close. All right. Sure, I call my parents every now and then, All right. My sister lives in Chicago. My brother's in London. I'm in Bangalore. My parents are in the southwest of England, but they go to North America a couple of times a year, visit family. So yeah, we keep in touch. We phone, we meet 2 or 3 times, but it's nowhere near as close as you guys.
Yes, here in India, yes.
Okay. I feel, for example, what I notice is that what families think is extremely important in India, much more than for us. And again, it's not good or bad, and there are some families where it's extremely conservative here, and some will kind of let you go off and do what you want. So it's important not to generalize, but there are always going to be, let's say, some generalization within certain societies. And I think the important thing is to, take those cultural sensitivities into account. But on the other hand, to be aware that it's not the same in every country. One thing I've noticed, another observation, is that, for example, the divorce rate in India is under 1%. Okay, you go to Europe and it's probably in the 20s, 30s, 40s. When I used to work in Moscow, there were girls who were 33 years old and were on their 3rd marriage, and there was zero stigma to this. It was almost viewed as cute. Okay, whereas here, people would look at that and think that was horrendous.
Horrendous, yes.
But again, the important thing is not to judge. It's to say, okay, I think it's important that people have the choice as to what they want to do without being judged. Now, some always will, but I don't think, and I think this is actually a mistake that Western countries have, that in our society, we unfortunately seem to think that we're superior and the way we do it is the best way, the only way. And if someone doesn't do it that way, then there's something wrong with them.
It's wrong. Yeah.
And I think we could learn, we could open up ourselves on this. And I see this when I meet people who don't travel very much, that they are quite insular. Again, let's say, just to sort of finish up on this, I would say, yeah, let's all, go out, meet more people. It's not just about getting on a plane. Sometimes it's about meeting people, even if they're in your hometown. But do open your eyes, do take advantage of opportunities to speak and talk and meet people from different cultures.
So, Luc, we are arriving at the end of today's episode. But before we let you go, there is one last thing that both our listeners and I would love to know your take on. And that's, how can organizations measure the success of their efforts to address cross-cultural issues in the workplace? So what do you have to say about this?
So obviously this is very difficult to measure because in theory you could say, all right, how would they have done if they'd stayed in one place? But then you don't know. You can only measure it against other people. But I would say that if you brought people from another location here or sent someone somewhere and people mixed in and they were successful, then absolutely, that's obviously got to be considered a success. I mean, I've seen organizations that are very homogenous, that they will only hire, as we talked about the unconscious bias earlier, people themselves.
Yes, and that's very prevalent here.
Yeah, I mean, I worked for one company, and I won't mention their name, but, the board of directors back in the UK was essentially a bunch of grey-haired men in their late 60s who could barely use email. They were just living in a totally different generation, completely in the past. And they were used to a secretary printing them out a sheet of reports and numbers each day, and they would sit around and discuss it. And they never visited any of the other offices. They had no idea where most of these locations were, and they didn't really care. And they had no concept of diversity. It was just purely about numbers. And I remember saying, look, if you guys understood people as well as you understood numbers, this would be a very successful organization. But ultimately, they were taken over just because they didn't adapt. And things are changing a lot. That I work in recruitment, so many of the people we're placing, I handle executive hiring. I'm 50, and many of the people I'm talking to are probably around about my age, maybe slightly younger, maybe slightly older, but similar. However, a lot of the recruitment that Randstad handles is people in their 20s and 30s. Now, how are you supposed to relate to people like that, okay, if you live in a different world? So it's not just about whether you come from a different culture, it's also a generational thing. So I didn't have my first mobile phone until I was, I think, about 26. All right. I grew up in a world to begin with where there was no internet, there was no LinkedIn, there was definitely no social media. You know, if you wanted to speak to someone, you didn't message them, you picked up the phone and called them.
Yes.
All right. You went on a business trip, you came back, and then you had a pile of papers to deal with. Then we had email, things evolved. Okay. But if you want to connect with younger people, you have to understand how they think. And you're not going to do that by surrounding yourself with identical people. So, as I said, it's not, when I say cross-cultural, this could be an age thing.
Yeah.
All right. This is probably a totally separate topic, but there are issues in the world with ageism. That you send a CV of a candidate in their early 50s, and the client says, no, the guy's too old. Okay, now whether that's legal or not is a separate question. But I think to myself, hang on a minute, I've just turned 50. I could do this. What's the problem? You know, you're not even interviewing the guy. And unfortunately, people have prejudices. They look at a CV and they almost search for a reason not to interview the person. Oh, I don't think he'll be a good fit. Hang on a minute. So often they don't even give the people the benefit of the doubt. And as I said, it's not something necessarily based on race or sex. It can be age, and that's an issue. So one of the things I do is I obviously in my job try to persuade people and say, look, I really think you should meet this person. Okay, I met him and I thought he was great. So, you know, if you come back to me afterwards with some concerns, that's fine. But don't give me a reason not to interview the person immediately. All right, let the person speak for themselves. So again, you know, I found this, that obviously we grew up in a bilingual household speaking both English and French, which is a bit unusual for Brits. Most of us don't speak another language. And my brother joined a French company and he started doing the interview in English, and suddenly the interviewer saw on his CV, oh, you speak fluent French. How come? He said, well, mum's from Quebec. And suddenly he felt the tone of the interview improved considerably, because he found a connection with the guy and he got the job. Now, I'm sure that wasn't the only reason, but it probably helped. So I find that if you can seek out a connection with someone, that one of the things I'd say to people is, look, if you're meeting up with someone, try and find out a little bit about them. Ask some questions. You know, where are you from? Where else have you lived? Who have you worked with? What do you like? And you can connect with people much better if you have something in common. Now, I don't think that's necessarily unconscious bias. That's just natural human behavior, that we make friends with people that have similar interests to ourselves. You know, I've met people who, let's say, if I take a step back, living as a foreigner abroad, you do sometimes become friends with people that you wouldn't necessarily be friends with in your own country, because the only thing you have in common is that you are a foreigner in this country. But I go traveling around India with some other foreigners because many of the places we visit are possibly not of that much interest to you guys, but we're here for a limited period of time, whereas you're here forever. And it's the same thing in any country. I started to visit more of the UK when tourists came over from other places and said, oh, Luke, can we go and visit this or that? And I thought to myself, well, I've never been there. Yeah, let's go. Because you're here probably for a long time. So you're in no rush to go and see things. Whereas we're trying to cram in as much as possible during our time here.
Yeah. Luke, since you've mentioned ageism, as well as lack of diversity, like bridging the generation gap itself is going to be quite a task, I believe. So, but do you see or do you expect any changes to come in near future? So are you seeing any emerging trends or anything right at this point in time, which is going to help in the evolution in the future? Or what do you have to say about it?
Honestly, Unfortunately, not much. And this is not an India issue. This is global. What I'm seeing is the fact that in the world, in almost every country, people are living longer, which obviously is a good thing. But, if people receive pensions, or even if they don't, they need money. And let's say you retire at 65, but you're going to continue living for many, many more years, and I hope you all do. Who's going to pay for it? So obviously countries are trying to extend the pensionable age. Okay, so if it was 65, they're trying to push it to 67, 69. People resist this, obviously, because they think they were ready to retire and oops, they have to work a bit longer. But I also understand that, where's the money going to come from? Someone's got to pay for it. The difficulty is that companies are saying, hey, we want to hire young people. So you're getting to a stage where you have quite a gap of people in their 50s and 60s who I think are very capable and have a lot of experience, who are suddenly considered unwanted because they're too old. And the usual advice I give is don't lose your job in the first place, okay? Or, try to stay young. Okay, try to connect, find out what the latest trends are. Okay, it doesn't mean you need to be, watching all of these 19-year-old stars on TikTok, but at least be aware of what younger trends are, what's changing, what's happening in your industry. I say, in terms of job seeking, that what you did 20 or 30 years ago is probably not very relevant to what's happening today or what you studied. So, you don't have to put that on your CV. Try not to be discriminated against. Don't put your date of birth on, okay? Don't put the years you were at university. It doesn't matter, okay? Just put your last 10, 15 years experience, not your last 30. So there are some little tricks. But again, there is some prejudice in that. But again, that's a sort of separate topic, but it is an issue. Now, some people don't want to work for a corporate until they're 68. Some people want to go off and do something a bit different. Some people maybe want to do a bit of consulting, do something freelance. But to understand the limitations of that you don't maybe necessarily get a daily paycheck, or daily, weekly or monthly. But important to remember, all right, what happens if it goes wrong? If you were made redundant tomorrow, how long would your savings last you? So, people need to ask themselves a lot of questions as to where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 15 years? What's the worst case scenario? So I've done sessions on this in the past. I don't want to go into too much detail. We could talk for another hour about this, but I think the most important thing is to keep abreast of the latest trends and keep yourself relevant.
Yeah, wonderful. Luc, we have reached the end of today's podcast. Do you have any message for our listeners? Our listeners would be delighted to hear it from you. Also, our audience might want to stay in touch with you post this podcast. So it would be great if you could tell them how they can reach out to you.
Sure, absolutely. I would say is open your eyes, be open to how things are done elsewhere, observe, and if you can, travel or talk and meet people from other cultures. It might be from within your own country. Avoid stereotypes, but ask people questions. How is this done differently in your culture? What's important for you? Please do check out my channel. Luc is spelled L-U-C, Jones, J-O-N-E-S. So it's Luc Jones the other way. I'm obviously on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. You can check out my photos of all my travel to exotic places. And obviously wishing you all the very best of luck.
Wonderful. Luc, it's been a pleasure to have you as our guest today. Your insights and expertise have been invaluable, and we are grateful for the time you've taken to share your knowledge with our listeners. So thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Luc.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to the Vantage HR Influencers podcast. Please do subscribe to Vantage HR Influencers podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and our YouTube channel for new episodes.